The hands gripping her arms were unbreakable. They hauled her down the aisle, past rows of silent guests, past her father who wouldn't meet her eyes, toward a man she'd never met. Her sister's groom. Except her sister was gone. He waited at the altar like death in a tuxedo. When they stopped in front of him, he leaned in close enough that only she could hear. "If you resist, if you don't do as I say, I'm going to hunt down your sister like a fucking dog and feed her to my wolves." That was the first thing her soon-to-be husband said to her. And in that moment, Nora Okonkwo understood. She wasn't a guest anymore. She was the sacrifice. Please subscribe to support this channel for more amazing stories. Nora Okonkwo stepped off the plane into Incheon International Airport with exactly two things: a carry-on suitcase and a headache that had lasted the entire 14-hour flight from Lagos. She hadn't wanted to come. Her father had insisted. "Your sister is getting married. Family comes first." Family. The word tasted bitter. Zara hadn't been family in years, not since their mother died and their father chose sides. Zara, the golden daughter who moved to Korea for university and never looked back. Nora, the one who stayed behind, who took care of their father, who made herself smaller and smaller until she practically disappeared. But here she was. In Seoul. For a wedding she didn't want to attend. For a sister who probably didn't even remember inviting her. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago. Cream cardstock, gold lettering, impersonal as a bill. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Okonkwo Zara and Shin Woobin." No personal note. No phone call. Just the invitation and a first-class ticket that arrived 2 days later. Their father had been thrilled. "This is good, Nora. This marriage, it's important. For all of us." She hadn't asked why. It seemed odd, but she learned long ago not to ask questions about her father's dealings and much less her sister's. The hotel was excessive. All marble and gold fixtures, the kind of place where even the air felt expensive. Nora's room overlooked the Han River, and for a moment, just a moment, she let herself imagine what it would be like to belong in a world like this. Her phone buzzed. A message from her father. "Remember. Be respectful. This family is very important. Do not embarrass us." She didn't respond. Another buzz. This time, a message from an unknown number. "Guest shuttle to the venue leaves at 4 p.m. Be in the lobby. Don't be late." Nora frowned. Not even a hello from her own sister. She showered, changed into the dress she'd brought, simple, red, appropriate for someone who was supposed to fade into the background. She braided her hair, applied minimal makeup, and stared at herself in the mirror. "You don't belong here," the reflection seemed to say. "You never did." The wedding venue was a private estate in Gangnam, hidden behind high walls and security gates that looked like they belonged to a military compound. The shuttle dropped guests at the entrance, where stern-faced men in black suits checked invitations with the thoroughness of border patrol. Nora handed over her invitation. The guard scanned it, looked at her face, then back at the card. "Okonkwo Nora?" "Yes." He spoke into his radio in rapid Korean. Then nodded. "Go ahead." The hall was stunning. White roses everywhere, crystal chandeliers hanging from trees, a string quartet playing something classical and melancholy. Guests mingled in clusters, beautiful people in expensive clothes, speaking in hushed tones like they were at a funeral instead of a wedding. Nora recognized no one. She found a seat in the back row of the outdoor ceremony space, far from the center aisle. Close enough to fulfill her obligation, far enough to escape quickly when it was over. More guests arrived. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The quartet shifted to the wedding march. Everyone stood. Nora stood too, craning her neck to see if Zara had actually shown up. But it wasn't the bride who appeared. It was the groom. Shin Woobin. He walked down the aisle alone. He was tall, sharp-featured, dressed in a black tuxedo that probably cost more than Nora's annual salary. His face was expressionless, but his eyes, dark and cold, scanned the crowd with predatory focus. He reached the altar. Turned. Waited. The music continued. No bride. Whispers rippled through the guests. Confusion, then concern, then something that felt like fear. Woobin didn't move. He stood at the altar like a statue, his jaw tight, his hands clasped in front of him. Waiting. 1 minute passed. 2. 3. Then he turned and spoke to someone off to the side, a man in a black suit who immediately pulled out a phone and made a call. The whispers grew louder. Woobin's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. A coiling tension, like a snake preparing to strike. He said something sharp in Korean. The man on the phone went pale. And then Woobin turned to look directly at the crowd. His eyes found Nora. Time stopped. Why was he looking at her? He said something to the men beside him. Pointed. And then they were moving, 4 men in black suits, cutting through the rows of seated guests with military precision. Heading straight for her. Nora's heart slammed against her ribs. Wait, what? Hands grabbed her arms. Strong hands. Unyielding. No, wait, there's been a mistake. They hauled her to her feet. Guests gasped, turning to stare. Let go of me. Nora tried to pull free, but their grip was iron. I'm just a guest, I don't. They dragged her down the aisle. She stumbled, nearly fell, her heels catching on the rose petals scattered across the white runner. The guests watched in stunned silence as she was pulled toward the altar like a sacrifice. Woobin watched her approach. His expression was carved from stone. They stopped in front of him, still gripping her arms. She was breathing hard, nearly in tears, fury and fear warring in her chest. Let go of me, she hissed. I don't know what you think. Where is she? His voice was quiet. Deadly. What? Your sister. Where is she? Nora's mind reeled. I don't know, I just got here, I thought she was. She ran. Woobin stepped closer. He smelled like expensive cologne and cold rage. Your sister ran. And you're going to take her place. The world tilted. No. Nora shook her head violently. No. I'm not, this is insane. You don't have a choice. I'm not marrying you. Her voice cracked. I don't even know you. Woobin leaned in close. His breath was warm against her ear, dropping to a whisper meant only for her. And that's when he said it. If you resist and you don't do as I say, I'm going to hunt down your sister like a fucking dog and feed her to my wolves. The words hit Nora like a physical blow. She went still. Completely still. Her mind was screaming run, fight, scream for help, but her body had frozen, locked in place by the cold certainty in his voice. He meant it. Every word. Woobin pulled back slightly, watching her face, reading her surrender in real time. Good, he said quietly. Now, you're going to stand beside me. You're going to repeat the vows when the officiant tells you to. You're going to sign the papers. And you're going to smile. Understood. Nora's throat was too tight to speak. She managed a jerky nod. I need to hear you say it. Yes. The word came out broken. Yes, I understand. Excellent. Woobin straightened, turning to address the crowd as if nothing unusual had just happened. As if he hadn't just threatened to murder someone. As if this was all perfectly normal. And that's when Nora saw them. The full room of guests who just witnessed her humiliation. Hundreds of them, seated in their perfect rows, watching this entire scene unfold. And not one of them had moved. Not one had stood up to object. Not one had pulled out a phone to call for help. Not one had so much as flinched when 4 men dragged her down the aisle against her will. They sat there in their designer clothes and expensive jewelry, champagne flutes still in hand, watching her like she was entertainment. Like this was just another spectacle at another extravagant wedding. Some looked uncomfortable. A few whispered to each other behind raised hands. But no one intervened. No one helped. And then Nora's eyes found him. Her father. He was looking right at her. And he wasn't moving. Daddy, the word escaped before she could stop it, desperate and childlike. For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe. Or regret. But then he looked away. Looked down at his hands. Said nothing. Did nothing. The betrayal hit harder than anything Woobin had said. Her father had known. He'd known what would happen when he sent her here. Known that Zara had run. Known that she would be the replacement. And he'd sent her anyway. Daddy, please, her voice cracked. He didn't look up. Nora felt something inside her chest crack apart. Something that had already been damaged, already been weakened by years of being the second daughter, the overlooked one, the one who was never quite enough. This was the final break. The moment she understood, with brutal clarity, that to her father she had never been a daughter. She'd been an asset. A backup plan. A piece on a chessboard to be sacrificed when necessary. Enough. Woobin's hand closed around her elbow, not bruising, but firm. A warning. The guests are waiting. Nora looked back at him, this stranger who was about to become her husband, and saw no mercy in his eyes. Only cold determination. She had no choice. Zara was out there somewhere, vulnerable, and this man had just promised to hunt her down if Nora didn't comply. Her father had abandoned her. The crowd was complicit in their silence. There was no rescue coming. Okay, Nora whispered. Okay. What followed felt like a fever dream. Woobin released her elbow and took her hand instead, a mockery of tenderness for the watching crowd. His palm was cool, his grip unbreakable. He led her up the steps to the altar. The officiant stood there waiting, an older man in traditional robes, his face professionally blank. If he thought anything was wrong with this situation, he gave no indication. He simply opened his book and began to speak. In Korean. Nora didn't understand a word. She stood there, numb, her hand trapped in Woobin's, staring at nothing while the officiant droned on. The words washed over her like water, meaningless sounds that somehow held the power to destroy her life. Around them, the garden was silent except for the officiant's voice and the whisper of wind through the roses. No one objected. No one spoke up. The ceremony proceeded as if this was exactly what was supposed to happen. The officiant said something that sounded like a question, looking at Woobin. Woobin responded in Korean, a short phrase, firm and clear. Then the officiant turned to Nora. She stared at him blankly. He's asking if you consent, Woobin said quietly beside her. His hand tightened fractionally around hers. A reminder. Nora's mouth was dry. Her tongue felt like lead. She looked out at the crowd one more time. At her father, who still wouldn't meet her eyes. At the guests who watched with detached curiosity. At the security positioned at every exit. There was no escape. I do. The words tasted like ash. The officiant nodded, satisfied, and continued speaking. More Korean. More meaningless sounds. And then he produced a document, thick paper, official-looking, covered in text she couldn't read. Sign here. Woobin released her hand long enough to accept a pen from one of his men, then held it out to her. Nora took it with shaking fingers. The document was placed on a small table that had been set up beside the altar. She could see signatures already on it, Woobin's, she assumed, bold and confident at the bottom of the page. There was a line waiting for hers. Sign, Woobin repeated, his voice low. Now. Nora pressed the pen to paper. Her hand was shaking so badly the signature came out jagged, barely legible. But it was there. Her name. In ink. On a marriage certificate. Binding her to a man she'd met 10 minutes ago. The officiant took the document, said something final sounding in Korean, and smiled at them like he'd just witnessed something beautiful. You may kiss the bride, he said in English. Nora's stomach dropped. Woobin turned to face her. His expression was unreadable. For a moment, she thought he might skip this part. Might spare her this final humiliation. But then his hand came up to cup her face, almost gently, almost tender, and he leaned in. The kiss was brief. Chaste. His lips were cool and firm against hers, there and gone in a heartbeat. But it sealed something irrevocable. Applause erupted from the crowd. Polite. Enthusiastic. As if they'd just witnessed a real wedding. A happy occasion. Woobin pulled back, his hand dropping from her face. He turned to acknowledge the guests with a slight nod, his expression still carved from stone. Smile, he murmured to Nora without looking at her. You're a bride. Act like one. Nora tried. She pulled her lips into something that might have resembled a smile if you squinted. But inside, she was screaming. There was no reception. No dinner. No cake cutting. No first dance. The moment the ceremony ended, Woobin took Nora's hand and led her back down the aisle, away from the altar, away from the guests, away from her father who still wouldn't look at her. People stood as they passed, still applauding, still smiling like nothing was wrong. Nora's legs moved on autopilot, her heels clicking against stone, her dress rustling around her knees. She felt disconnected from her body, like she was watching this happen to someone else. They reached the end of the aisle. A black car was waiting, a Mercedes sedan with tinted windows and a driver already behind the wheel. One of Woobin's men opened the back door. "Get in," Woobin said. Nora looked back one last time. At the gardens. The guests. The altar where her life had just been destroyed. Her father was standing now, speaking to someone, his back to her. He never turned around. Now. Woobin's voice was harder this time. Nora got in the car. Woobin slid in beside her. The door shut with a solid thunk. The locks engaged with a quiet click. And then they were moving. Pulling away from the estate, from the wedding that wasn't supposed to be hers, from the life she'd walked into just 3 hours ago. She was leaving as someone's wife. A total stranger's wife. She didn't know where they were going. Didn't know what would happen next. Didn't know anything except that she was trapped. The man beside her, her husband, stared out the window, his jaw tight, his hands folded in his lap. He didn't speak. Didn't explain. Didn't acknowledge her at all. The city blurred past the tinted windows, Seoul in the golden hour, beautiful and indifferent, full of people living normal lives while Nora's had just shattered into pieces she didn't know how to put back together. She tried to breathe through the panic rising in her chest. Tried to think. Zara. I have to protect Zara. That's what he'd said. That's what he'd threatened. But where was Zara? Why had she run? And what had their father gotten them into that ended with Nora married to a man who talked about feeding people to wolves? Where are we going? Nora's voice came out hoarse. Woobin didn't look at her. Home. Home. My home. You're home now. He turned his head slightly, and in the dying light, his profile looked like it had been carved from marble. Get used to it, Nora. This is your life now. The car drove on, carrying her deeper into Seoul, deeper into whatever nightmare she'd just been trapped in. And in the distance, the sun set behind the mountains, bleeding red across the sky. The drive lasted 40 minutes, but it felt like hours. Nora sat pressed against the door, as far from Woobin as the back seat would allow, her mind racing in desperate circles. Every plan she tried to form dissolved before it fully took shape. Call the police? And say what? That she'd been forced into a marriage her own father had arranged? Run? To where? She had no money, no phone, it was still in her clutch back at the wedding, didn't speak Korean, and this man had already proven he could find anyone he wanted. I'm going to hunt down your sister like a fucking dog. The threat played on repeat in her head, a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Beside her, Woobin remained motionless, staring out his window like she didn't exist. His face was still that perfect mask of control, but she noticed the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers occasionally flexed against his thigh like he was restraining himself from something. The city changed around them. They left the tree-lined streets of Gangnam and entered an area that was all steel and glass, luxury high-rises that pierced the sky, buildings so tall they seemed to disappear into the clouds. The car pulled into an underground garage beneath one of the tallest towers, descending level after level until they reached what must have been a private parking area. Only 3 cars occupied this level. All black. All expensive. All alone in the cavernous space. The driver pulled into a spot directly in front of a private elevator. Woobin opened his door and stepped out. He didn't wait for her, didn't offer his hand, just started walking toward the elevator. Out, the driver said, the first word he'd spoken all evening. His accent was thick, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Nora's legs felt like water as she climbed out of the car. Her heels echoed in the empty garage, each step feeling like walking toward an execution. Woobin was already inside the elevator, holding the door with one hand. She had no choice but to follow. The elevator was all mirrors and dim lighting. Nora caught her reflection and barely recognized herself. Her makeup was smudged from the tears she'd tried not to cry. Her dress, the red dress she'd carefully chosen that morning, looked rumpled and wrong. Her eyes were wide and shell-shocked. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd just been kidnapped and forced into marriage. Woobin inserted a key card into a slot above the button panel and pressed the button marked P. Penthouse. Of course. The elevator rose so smoothly Nora barely felt the movement. Floor numbers ticked by on the display. 10, 20, 30, 40. They didn't stop until 52. The doors opened directly into an apartment. No hallway. No shared space. The elevator was the entrance. Nora stepped out into a living room that looked like something from an architecture magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows made up the entire far wall, offering a view of Seoul that would have been breathtaking under any other circumstances. The Han River snaked through the city below, its surface reflecting the lights of 1,000 buildings. In the distance, mountains were dark silhouettes against the purple sky. The apartment itself was massive, all clean lines and expensive materials. White marble floors. Minimalist furniture in blacks and grays. Art on the walls that Nora suspected was original, not prints. Everything was pristine, sterile, perfect. It looked like a showroom, not a home. Like no one actually lived here. Woobin shrugged off his tuxedo jacket and draped it over a chair. He loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and walked to the bar area without saying a word. Nora stood frozen near the elevator, unsure if she was allowed to move. Unsure of anything. She watched as Woobin poured himself a drink, whiskey, from the color and downed it in one swallow. Then poured another. "Are you going to stand there all night?" he asked without turning around. "I don't know what you want me to do," Nora said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I want you to stop looking at me like I'm about to murder you." He turned, glass in hand, and leaned against the bar. "It's irritating. You threatened to feed my sister to wolves. And you believed me." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Smart girl." Nora's hands clenched into fists. "Where is she?" "Zara, do you know where she went?" "No." He took another sip. "If I did, we wouldn't be having this conversation." "Then how do you know you can find her?" "Because I have resources you can't imagine. Money, people, connections. If I want to find someone, I find them. It's just a matter of time." He paused. "But I don't particularly want to waste those resources hunting down a woman who clearly doesn't want to be found. So, you're going to help me." "Help you how?" "You're going to contact her. Tell her you're fine. Tell her you're safe. And you're going to convince her to tell you where she is." "And then what?" Nora's voice shook. "You'll drag her back here? Force her to." "No." Woobin cut her off. "I don't want her anymore. That ship has sailed. But there are other parties who might be interested in her whereabouts. People I can trade that information to." "Trade?" Horror crawled up Nora's spine. "What kind of people?" "The kind your sister should have thought about before she ran." He set down his glass. "But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, you need to understand the rules." "Rules?" "This is a marriage in name only. You'll live here, in this apartment. You'll appear with me at events when required. You'll play the role of my wife in public. But in private," he gestured between them. "We're strangers. You stay in your room, I stay in mine. Don't touch my things. Don't snoop. Don't ask questions about my business. And most importantly," his eyes went cold, "don't try to leave. You're keeping me prisoner. I'm keeping you safe." "Safe?" Nora let out a laugh that sounded unhinged even to her own ears. "You forced me to marry you." "Yes, because the alternative was much worse." "What alternative?" For a moment, Woobin looked like he might answer. Then his expression shuddered again. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here now and you're going to stay here. Fight me on this, and I will make your life more difficult than it has to be. Cooperate, and things will be tolerable." "Tolerable," Nora repeated flatly. "You stole my life and you're offering me tolerable? Would you rather prefer a different outcome?" His voice was sharp now, an edge of anger finally breaking through. Before Nora could respond, he pushed off from the bar and walked towards her slowly with an unreadable intention in his eyes that sent a shiver down her spine. He was up close and personal, and his eyes looked straight into hers like he wanted to consume her. But she pulled away. Woobin scoffed and then turned to walk away. Your room is the second door on the left. Your things from the hotel have already been brought over. There's a bathroom attached. Stay there tonight. Wait. But he was already gone, disappearing into what she assumed was his own room. A door closed with a decisive click. And Nora was alone. For a long moment, Nora just stood there in the massive living room, her mind blank with shock. This couldn't be real. This morning she'd been in Lagos, living her small, ordinary life. Tonight she was married to a stranger in Seoul, trapped in a penthouse 52 floors above the city, being told she was a prisoner. Her legs finally moved. She walked down the hallway Woobin had indicated, her heels muffled by thick carpet. The second door on the left was closed. She opened it slowly, half expecting something terrible on the other side. Instead, she found a bedroom that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. King-size bed with white linens. More floor-to-ceiling windows showing the city lights. A sitting area with a small sofa and coffee table. And yes, her suitcase from the hotel, sitting on a bench at the foot of the bed. The room was beautiful. And it felt like a cage. Nora walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. 52 floors down, the city pulsed with life. Cars moved along streets. People walked on sidewalks. The world continued on, completely unaware that her life had just been destroyed. She thought about Zara. Where was she right now? Did she know what had happened? Did she care? Had she known this would happen when she ran? The thought made Nora's stomach turn. Surely not. Surely Zara hadn't deliberately set her up to take her place. They hadn't been close in years, but sisters didn't do that to each other. They didn't. Except their father had done exactly that. He'd sent her here knowing what would happen. Knowing she'd be the replacement. And he'd watched it happen without lifting a finger to stop it. The betrayal was so profound Nora couldn't even process it. It sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and cold and impossibly painful. She turned away from the window and caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror near the closet. The red dress looked wrong on her now, tainted by what had happened in it. She unzipped it with shaking hands and let it fall to the floor, stepping out of it like it was contaminated. Her heels followed. Then her jewelry, the simple necklace and earrings she'd worn. In just her underwear, she walked into the attached bathroom. It was all marble and chrome, with a rainfall shower, a deep soaking tub, and more mirrors. Someone had already stocked it with toiletries, expensive brands, and unmarked bottles. Everything provided. Everything controlled. Nora turned on the shower as hot as it would go and stepped under the spray. And finally, she let herself cry. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside, wrenched from her chest with a violence that left her gasping. She cried for the life she'd lost, for the sister who'd abandoned her, for the father who'd betrayed her. She cried for herself, for the girl who'd boarded a plane that morning thinking she was just attending a wedding, never imagining she'd be the bride. She cried until she had nothing left. Until the water ran cold and her skin was wrinkled and she was empty. Then she dried off, wrapped herself in the plush robe hanging on the back of the door, and walked back into the bedroom. Her phone, she needed her phone. Maybe it was in her suitcase, maybe someone had grabbed it from her hotel room. She unzipped the suitcase and dumped everything out onto the bed. Her clothes were there. Her toiletries. But no phone. No laptop. Nothing that could connect her to the outside world. Of course. Woobin had thought of everything. Nora's legs gave out. She sank onto the bed, staring at nothing, her mind racing and empty at the same time. She was trapped. Completely, utterly trapped. And somewhere out there, Zara was free, living her life, probably with no idea what she'd left behind. Nora didn't think she'd be able to sleep that night, but exhaustion eventually claimed her. She woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and, for one blissful moment, forgot where she was. Forgot everything that had happened. Then memory crashed back and nausea rolled through her stomach. She sat up slowly, her head pounding. The clock on the nightstand read 9:47 a.m. For a moment, she considered staying in bed, hiding under the covers and pretending none of this was real. But she needed answers. Needed to understand what she'd been dragged into. She got up, dug through her suitcase for clothes, jeans, and a t-shirt, the most casual things she'd brought, and got dressed. No makeup. Hair pulled back in a messy bun. She didn't care what she looked like. There was no one to impress. When she opened her bedroom door, the apartment was silent. She walked down the hallway cautiously, unsure if Woobin was even home. The living room was empty, pristine as it had been last night. Morning light flooded through the massive windows, making the marble floors gleam. But there was coffee brewing in the kitchen. Nora followed the smell and found a full pot waiting, still hot. 2 mugs sat beside it. And a note, written in sharp, precise handwriting. Help yourself. I'll be back this afternoon. Don't try to leave. The elevator requires a keycard and security is stationed in the garage. We'll talk when I return. Nora crumpled the note in her fist. So she really was a prisoner. She poured herself coffee with shaking hands and walked to the windows. From this height, Seoul looked almost peaceful. She could see the Han River winding through the city, the mountains in the distance, the sprawl of buildings that went on forever. Somewhere down there, people were living normal lives. Going to work. Meeting friends. Making choices. And she was up here. Trapped. Married to a man she didn't know for reasons she didn't understand. She needed to think. Needed a plan. First, find a way to contact Zara. Not to betray her location, Nora would never do that, but to warn her. To tell her what had happened. Second, figure out what her father's involvement really was. What had he gotten them into? What debt was Woobin talking about? Third, escape. Somehow. There had to be a way out of this. Nora spent the morning exploring the apartment, looking for anything useful. But every window was sealed, couldn't be opened. The elevator required Woobin's keycard. There was no landline phone. No computer. Nothing. She was beginning to understand just how thoroughly she was trapped when she heard it. A sound from somewhere in the apartment. A door opening. Footsteps. Nora froze, her heart racing. Had Woobin come back early? But the footsteps were lighter. Quicker. A woman appeared in the living room doorway. She was young, maybe early 30s Korean, dressed in a crisp black pantsuit. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her expression was professionally neutral. "Mrs. Shin," she said in perfect English. "Good morning. My name is Lee Minji. I'm Mr. Shin's executive assistant." Nora blinked. "Mrs. Shin?" "Yes. That's your name now." Minji's expression didn't change. "I'm here to discuss your schedule and responsibilities." "My responsibilities?" "As Mr. Shin's wife, there are certain expectations. Public appearances. Charity events. Social obligations." Minji pulled out a tablet. "I've prepared a calendar for the next month. We'll need to get you appropriate clothing, schedule etiquette training." "Wait." Nora held up a hand. "I'm not doing any of that." Minji looked at her like she'd just said something incomprehensible. "I'm sorry. I didn't choose this. I'm not going to play dress-up and pretend to be his perfect wife." "Mrs. Shin." Minji's voice took on a harder edge. "You don't understand the situation you're in. Then explain it to me. Mr. Shin is a very powerful man. He has enemies. People who would use anyone close to him as leverage. Right now, you're vulnerable. The only thing protecting you is the legitimacy of this marriage. If you refuse to cooperate, if you embarrass him publicly, you become a liability instead of an asset. And Mr. Shin doesn't keep liabilities." The implication hung in the air, cold and clear. Nora's mouth went dry. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm explaining reality." Minji's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Shin, Nora, I know this isn't what you wanted. But you're here now. And the safest thing you can do is cooperate. Make this marriage look real. Let Mr. Shin protect you. Because trust me when I say that what's out there," she gestured vaguely toward the windows, toward the city beyond, "is much more dangerous than anything in here. I want to talk to my father." "That's not possible." "Why not?" "Mr. Shin has forbidden it." Rage flared in Nora's chest. "He can't just." "He can." "He did. Your father is part of the reason you're in this situation. Mr. Shin believes contact with him would be counterproductive." "This is insane." Nora's voice rose. "You realize that, right? This is kidnapping. This is This is marriage. Minji cut her off. Legal and binding. You signed the papers yourself. I saw the certificate. I was forced. Can you prove that? Minji's voice was gentle but relentless. Would any court believe you over Mr. Shin? Would they believe a Nigerian woman with no connections in Korea over one of the most powerful men in Seoul? The answer hung between them, obvious and brutal. No. No one would believe her. Nora sank onto the nearest chair, her legs giving out. She was truly, completely trapped. Minji sat across from her, her expression sympathetic now. I know this is overwhelming. But I promise, if you cooperate, things will get easier. Mr. Shin isn't cruel. He's complicated. But he keeps his word. If you play your part, you'll be taken care of. I don't want to be taken care of, Nora whispered. I want my life back. I know. Minji's voice was surprisingly kind. But that's not an option anymore. So the question is, are you going to fight this and make yourself miserable? Or are you going to adapt and survive? Nora looked up at this woman, this stranger who seemed to understand exactly how trapped she was. What would you do? She asked. If you were me? Minji was quiet for a moment. Then, I'd survive. I'd learn everything I could about my situation. I'd look for leverage. And I'd wait for the right moment to use it. It wasn't the answer Nora had expected. But it was the first honest thing anyone had said to her since this nightmare began. She took a shaky breath. Okay, tell me about this schedule. Minji's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. She opened her tablet. Let's start with next week. There's a charity gala that Mr. Shin always attends. The meeting with Minji lasted another 30 minutes. Schedules, etiquette expectations, wardrobe requirements. By the time she left, Nora's head was spinning with information she didn't want and a life she hadn't chosen. The apartment fell silent again. Nora stood in the living room, staring at nothing. Woobin wouldn't be back for hours. The penthouse stretched around her, beautiful, sterile, and utterly empty. She started moving. If she was going to be trapped here, she needed to understand what she was trapped in. Who Woobin really was. What her father had gotten her into. The hallway led past her bedroom to other doors she hadn't explored. Most were locked. But one at the very end opened when she tried the handle. Woobin's study. It was smaller than she expected. Dark wood desk, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a leather chair that probably cost more than her rent back home. Everything precisely arranged. Cold. Controlled. And mounted on the wall, a large flat-screen television. Nora's pulse quickened. She needed information. Needed to know what was happening in the world outside this gilded cage. She searched the desk for a remote, careful not to disturb anything. Drawers locked. The bookshelf, nothing. Behind a small sculpture on the credenza, there. Her hands shook as she powered on the TV. Korean news channel. She scrolled through stations until she found one with English subtitles. BBC World News. The anchor was discussing European markets. Nora exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Normal. The world was still normal somewhere. The program cut to breaking news. Breaking. Nigerian businessman found dead in Lagos. Nora's breath stopped. The screen filled with a photograph she knew by heart. Her father's face. Older. Tired. But unmistakably him. The anchor's voice continued, professional and detached. Isaac Okonkwo, 58, was found dead in his hotel room late last night. Police are investigating what they're calling a targeted shooting. Okonkwo was a prominent shipping magnate with business interests across West Africa and Asia. The remote slipped from Nora's fingers and hit the carpet. Her father was dead. Dead. The word didn't make sense. Couldn't be real. She'd just seen him yesterday, sitting in that church pew, watching her get dragged down the aisle, refusing to meet her eyes. Her chest seized. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The room tilted. He watched them force me into this marriage, and then he... The elevator chimed. Nora's head snapped toward the sound, her body frozen. Footsteps. Deliberate. Coming closer. Woobin appeared in the study doorway. He looked at her face. At the television, still displaying her father's photograph. at the remote on the floor. His expression didn't change. But tears were already streaming down Nora's face, hot, angry, desperate tears that blurred her vision. The moment she saw him standing there, calm and composed while her father's face filled the screen behind her, something inside her snapped. Grief twisted into rage. "You bastard," she screamed, her voice raw and breaking. "It was you. You did this." Her hand shot out, grabbing the heavy desk lamp beside her. She ripped it from the socket and lunged at him, the lamp raised like a weapon, a guttural cry tearing from her throat as she charged. If you've come this far, please subscribe for part 2.